This is the
Five Stars
podcast.
Let me talk to you.
Hi.
So, what do you guys want to talk about? Tell me when I'm telling lies.
Thanks, guys. Back to you.
Well, that was a miserable week of cold weather. Glad it's done and over with. You know, the only good thing about it was that there wasn't any snow. The weather app said 8 degrees. I'm pretty sure when you factor in the wind chill, it was a solid -3. I have been used to seeing that level of coldness in years. See, that's a problem when you go through like 3 winter cycles without actually getting true winter weather. I mean, last year I think we got maybe an inch or two of snow tops. It really didn't even fully start until sometime in early February. This year we were getting snow as early as November. And it's been pretty steady. We haven't gotten blizzard weather yet. But you know it's only a matter of time. Seasonal changes are weird, man. But we're here for another Friday roundup of classic wrestling talk. Steadily moving through the tape library of all the classic footage. If you are checking out the Five Starr Wrestling Report for the first time, make sure you subscribe, comment, and like the show for me. You can find us here on YouTube and Rumble on Mondays and Fridays for new shows and new coverage. We are indeed the wrestling podcast nobody knows but everybody needs. Especially if you're confined to your homes during these trialing times. We do have a lot of fun stuff to get into today. I've been really antsy to talk about this TBS Superstation program. Well, not the whole program, mainly one segment. Not to try and undercut everything else. I know there was that period at the end of last year where I kept reminding everybody about how bad things are about to get with WCW in 1989. It wasn't entirely bad from the start. Keep in mind, this is still pre-George Scott. You know, Jim Crockett is still overseeing things, giving the boys a little more leeway with their material. It hasn't fully gone off the rails yet. So, let's try to enjoy the good moments while we still can, because they don't last. I also hate to be that guy, but outside the big tag showdown between the Horseman, Eddie Gilbert, and the mystery partner, you could pretty much write the rest of the show off. It was a one-note show. A very famous one, yes. But outside that 15-minute window, the remaining 40-ish minutes was very forgettable stuff. With that said, I'll tell you, I don't remember how the ratings did for this show. I would not be shocked if they did a banger number for it. I mean, not only did they hype the crap out of this thing the previous week, setting up those big angles and the interview segments with Flair, Windham, and Gilbert, but man, even Eddie coming out right at the beginning of the program here and telling everybody nationwide, if you got friends and family that aren't currently tuned into TBS on their Superstation, get them to flip over to the channel right now, because they're not going to want to miss Eddie's big surprise. I don't honestly remember the last time I saw WCW hype up a main event match like this on TV. It's been a long time. I remember Flair and Ronnie Garvin was a big deal when they did that match in late 85. I think it was for the final show of the year. Flair and Ricky Morton was a considerably big deal when they advertised that for television. But when you think, those two matches alone, we're going back, what, 2, almost 3 full years? Midnight Rock and Roll for the World Tag Titles, I can't forget that one too. But again, 1986. It was a long way back. I mean, if their goal was to get over Flair's next world title program in a big way, hats off to them. They hit the jackpot with this one. Couldn't have sold it any better. Now, hypothetically, I could just skip right to that match if I wanted to, but there was some other stuff that happened on the show this week. And nothing better personifies stuff that happened than with what they open with. Michael Hayes versus Russian Assassin number 2. Better known as Michael Hayes versus Jack Victory. For those of you wondering, yes, Paul Jones is still an active manager. The Russian Assassins are still a thing. They've gone from beating Ivan Koloff and JYD in a tag match at Starrcade to now they are losing to Michael Hayes in under 10 minutes on television. Now, that does at least explain why Hayes and the Dog formed that completely makeshift pairing last week that was never fully explained. Actually, kind of forgot that Ivan and JYD were a tag team right beforehand. But since Ivan's basically gone now, it was a question of, do we continue to have the Junkyard Dog try to wrestle singles matches every week? Or do we hide him in a tag team so he doesn't have to do a considerable amount of work? From my vantage point, they chose wisely. So Hayes and the Assassin had their match. It was kind of bland and uninteresting. Even Paul Jones wasn't really doing much on the floor to garner heat on himself. He was just kind of standing there. They get to the spot where the Assassin thinks he has Hayes pinned down. So while the heels are doing a premature celebration, Hayes comes in and schoolboys number 2 for the 3. I mean, I guess I shouldn't be surprised that Hayes was as over as he was here. They were in Atlanta. God, every time I watch a Michael Hayes match, there's no way that kind of gimmick would get over the same way in 2025. With everybody so hung up on work rate these days, if a guy like Michael Hayes came around, regardless of how charismatic or flamboyant he was on camera, if he wrestled the same way Hayes did, he would get shit on by all the marks in the crowd. Maybe they could get away with it in WWE. I don't know. But yeah, Michael P.S. Hayes. Not a great ring technician. Fantastic personality. But he's not what you would consider a ring general. So following that, we came back for Hacksaw Butch Reed versus George South. The talent turnover period is being unveiled more and more frequently under this new Turner regime. And here's another name you can add to the list. Butch Reed making his WCW debut here in 1989. Fresh off the WWF run where they really didn't do jack shit with him for several years. It was actually more like 2 years. I'm trying to think, when did he get there? Was it 86 or 87? I can't remember. I didn't really watch a whole lot of Butch Reed footage in the WWF. Not to say WCW did a banner job with his booking either, but at least we got Doom. And JR had a lot of good things to say about him here, which isn't all that unexpected. I mean, JR covered a lot of Butch Reed material in Midsouth from over the years. I'll be honest, I don't have much of a memory of what they did with Butch Reed here in the NWA early on. I know he works a program with Sting, which kind of peters out following the Chi-Town Rumble when Sting beats him. From there, I'm trying to think. Doesn't he get involved with some kind of issue with the Horsemen? It would have been right after Barry Windham left, I think. I seem to recall him and J.J. Dillon doing something together, but now I'm drawing a blank. I mean, it's not too long from now where we'll see him and Ron Simmons team up after they get put underneath the black hoods. But that all happens later in the year. It was a good introduction for Reed, though. He showed up as a heel, which is always the better version of Butch Reed. His work was not too bad. He was a little older by this stage in his career, so it's not like he was a spring chicken. Still in great shape physically. He went over here with a flying lariat in about 3 minutes. Really all there was to it. And then we came back where JR was at the podium interviewing Mike Rotunda and Kevin Sullivan. And, this is one of those segments where, as I watch the dynamic between Sullivan talking versus Rotunda talking, Sullivan's out there talking about not being afraid of the Road Warriors because fear left his body when he was strapped to the Tree of Woe for 6 days and 6 nights. Fear left his body when he was confined to the loony bin for 4 days with no food or water. And meanwhile, Rotunda's just there doing a generic heel promo talking about reclaiming the TV title and how he's going to embarrass Rick Steiner. Definitely a modern-day yin and yang situation with the Varsity Club. At the same time, the dynamic works so well. It was also at this point where I realized that Sullivan legitimately could not figure out the Road Warriors catchphrase to save his life. Last week he fucked it up when he said something like snatching on danger or whatever it was he mumbled. This week, he rearranged the phrase and said, snack on death and dine on danger. I mean, I love Kevin Sullivan, but dude, it's not that hard. Snack on danger, dine on death. Say it in front of the mirror a few times. It's not a tongue twister. And so after Sullivan promised to reach down Hawk's throat to rip out his heart, we promptly go to the ring for Sullivan and Rotunda versus Gene Miller and Randy Hogan. I was kind of hoping to see Sullivan reach down and pull out Randy Hogan's heart at some point in this match. That way we wouldn't have to see him wrestle anymore. Instead, they just took turns beating the piss out of him for approximately 2 minutes. And then he tagged in Gene Miller, and all the fun was ruined. And about 5 wrist locks and several mat holds later, Rotunda hit Miller with a butterfly suplex and pinned him. I was a bigger fan of the match they had last week when Sullivan and Dr. Death just went out there and beat the teetotal fuck out of their opponents. One of whom I believe was Randy Hogan. This week they took pity on him. Then we had Eddie Gilbert back out at the interview podium in order to set up the big tag bout we were about to see. They took a minute to replay the angle from last week when Flair and Windham beat up Gilbert and left him laying. And it was the final pitch where Gilbert told the Horsemen that he's found a tag partner that he knows can beat Flair, Windham, and JJ with both hands tied behind his back. And so now comes the big reveal. Who is Eddie Gilbert's tag partner? Well, the speculation was that he would show up in the form of Mr. X, but this was no Mr. X. Live and in living color, baby. To a great babyface reception upon his arrival. Who should Eddie's partner be but Ricky the Dragon Steamboat? Hell yeah. God, the timing of this is so impeccable. You remember last week on my Midsouth review, I went through that whole spiel about creating a star in one night by just having the guy show up and get a surprise win over a top guy. It's the exact same thing they did with Terry Taylor, except this was even bigger. I mean, Terry Taylor just showed up and pinned one half of the Russians. Ricky Steamboat showed up here and went toe-to-toe with the two top stars in the NWA. And he wound up pinning the World Heavyweight Champion, Ric Flair. But it's the same principle. How do you get over a star in one night? Moreover, a new top babyface. You have him show up, get a flash pin on one of your top heels to cement the deal. It's as simple as that. And man, what a fucking TV match. This was a damn near perfect match from start to finish. Between Steamboat going out there and absolutely dominating Flair and Windham at the same time. The heels are just bumping around like madmen for Steamboat. Gilbert getting the opportunity to run wild in there for a while, only to get cut off and then methodically worked over by the heels. I mean, this is one of those matches where I look back and remember just how great everybody's punches used to look. Nowadays, nobody can throw a convincing-looking punch. They all look like dog shit. But what can you say about it? Everybody worked their asses off. It was all action from start to finish. Eddie did a great job selling and milking that eventual hot tag to Steamboat. But like even when watching Eddie sell for Windham and Flair's offense, God, his ability to register everything and make it look like he was in a struggle, that's the kind of great stuff that you just don't see that often with your babyfaces in peril. You know, it's one thing to sell a body part or pretend like you're in jeopardy. But if you actually study this match and look at Eddie Gilbert's facials, like that's the kind of thing where you're like, this guy's making it look like he's fighting for his life. I mean, they used to call that Ricky Morton selling, because Ricky was such a natural at facials and psychology. And of course, you get the big turning point where Barry goes up and misses a big diving elbow. Steamboat gets the hot tag, gets in there and starts rallying the babyface comeback of the decade. Everybody in the crowd is going batshit for all this, by the way. That kind of goes without saying. I will criticize one thing about Ricky Steamboat, just to play devil's advocate. Ricky did not have the press slam down packed. I mean, there were several times in this match where you could tell he nearly lost Flair in the overhead position or just couldn't get him up all the way. Like at one point, you could actually see Flair grab onto Steamboat's hair just to keep himself propped up in overhead position. Elsewise, I think Steamboat would have lost his grip and dropped him. So thank God for Ric Flair having so much upper body strength to be able to control that. But you get to the end, Steamboat goes up top, Flair's dazed and woozy as he gets back to his feet, and as he comes down with a crossbody on Flair, he has him pinned down. Teddy Long goes to count the fall. 1, 2, 3. And just like that, The World's Heavyweight Champion was pinned in a non-title sanctioned bout on live TV. You really didn't see it all too frequently. God, and what a pop for the victory, too. And I'll share more of my thoughts on Flair and Steamboat in a minute, but let me just quickly touch up on the closing few minutes, because this all ties together. I don't want to leave out any details. These last several minutes of television were just classic NWA material, man. You got Gilbert and Steamboat recapping the footage, talking about how Steamboat has a quest to become the NWA World's Heavyweight Champion. It's just the most white meat of all white meat babyface promos. You know, he's talking about his newborn son, saying he's happy to see that people have given him a warm reception after being away from the company for a while. And while he's not necessarily the most fiery guy on the stick, Steamboat never was, it was the perfect contrast to Flair's promo as he comes out there fuming and flipping his lid. It's a great heel horseman promo. JJ's standing there talking about how this is a travesty of justice. This will never go down in the record books as a legit win. Had they known Ricky Steamboat was going to be Eddie's partner, well, they would have prepared better for it. But they had no way of being able to properly get ready for this match. This was a deliberate attempt at sabotaging them. And they won't have it stand. Meanwhile, Flair's doing one of his somebody get this guy a drink raging heel promos. Talking about how he's a multimillionaire. He's the world heavyweight champion. He doesn't have to put up with any of this. Steamboat coming out there acting all classy and trying to be so smooth. Flair's going to take it all out on Steamboat. You're mine, Steamboat. Woo! Literally, the only thing missing from the equation was Flair dropping to his back and doing snow angels on the concrete. That would have made this an all-timer. But overall, amazing television. One of the best things we've seen on Superstation TBS in a very long time. And even though it was only an hour show this week, I really don't think you could have asked for anything better. Especially as a closer. I mean, nothing else was going to come anywhere close to topping this. Had they tried airing another hour of tape footage. I mean, it was a one-note program. Tag match was really the only thing that mattered on the whole episode. But there was so much to unpack in the Flair-Steamboat rivalry. Now, I presume most people are pretty aware of their history going back before 1989. I mean, this is a rivalry that dates all the way back to 1977, when Steamboat pinned Flair in Raleigh, North Carolina to become the NWA Mid-Atlantic TV champion. In very similar fashion to how he beat Flair here on television. And of course, it explains the context when Steamboat's out there calling out J.J. Dillon, saying he's had to hear J.J. talk for 12 years about how great guys like Ric Flair were. And while it may be true, he's sick and tired of hearing the message crammed down his throat. And it's one of those classic rivalries that stems from a very rudimentary premise. Steamboat was the young, good-looking babyface proposition. Flair was a sappy, arrogant heel champion who tried to pick a fight, underestimating him and thinking he was easy pickings. Well, and then it came back to bite Flair in the ass when Steamboat showed up and pinned him in the upset victory. And as we'll see, going back and revisiting the feud 12 years later, they're going to break out some old classic angles from the original Steamboat Flair program, including Steamboat stripping Flair down to his underwear. And obviously there's the whole timing question of, why did Steamboat choose to come back to the NWA now? Was it strictly because Dusty left? For anybody unaware, Steamboat and Dusty weren't necessarily on the best of terms right before he left in 85. I mean, it is oddly convenient. The moment Dusty's out of there, Steamboat shows back up in the NWA. Two things can be true at once. I think it partially had to do with Dusty being gone. But on the other hand, he was already in the WWF prior. He already had some issues going on with Vince over the whole IC title situation. Him wanting time off because his wife was about to give birth to Richie, but Vince wasn't happy about it. So they pretty much immediately took the belt off of him. And I think by that point, Ricky kind of saw the writing on the wall and figured he was on borrowed time with WWF anyway. I would argue the timing worked really well in Ricky's favor. Because when you also analyze the situation with Flair around this time, who else was there for him to feud with? Sting still wasn't ready. They already killed the intrigue of Luger winning the belt after they botched both title matches in 88. I mean, the best you could have argued was maybe if they plugged Rick Steiner into that spot. And in that case, it might have worked, given how over he was. But I think the Steamboat thing worked out at the best possible time. And Eddie Gilbert was always kind of a placeholder in this feud to get the ball rolling with Ricky. No offense to Eddie. I know he and Flair didn't always see eye to eye on things. I don't really believe there was ever a consideration for him to be a major world title contender. People often look back and consider Flair and Steamboat one of the all-time great rivalries. It's hard to argue with it. Especially when you think about longevity, personality dynamics, star power. This is a classic wrestling tale. I mean, the only difference between 1977 and 1989 is that now they're coming back to this feud on a bigger scale. Ricky was a much more established name than he was even as far back as the late 70s. By the time Steamboat returned in 89, it was about him trying to capture the most prestigious of all the world titles. And again, you think, knowing he was probably never going to get a fair shake in the WWF, I don't think Vince ever really viewed Steamboat as that guy. Plus, I don't think Hogan would have wanted to compete with him as a top babyface. Especially around that time. Politics would have gone in the way of that. So this all worked. I can't say enough good about it. It's one of those moments that people often reflect back on and says it stands the test of time. I fully concur. And as we'll see over the next few months, this is the main feud that carries the program into the late spring season. Ricky Steamboat and Ric Flair, the primary driving force in the NWA. A feud so simple on paper, you think there's no possible way they could fuck it up. Enter George Scott. And the rest is history. So as business continues to pick up in the Midsouth area here in 1984, in addition to everything currently going on with the Russians, the breakup of Butch Reed and Jim Neidhart's tag team, some of the newer faces we've seen show up in the last couple weeks, Terry Taylor last week, Buddy Landell this week, there's a lot going on, and a lot of it almost pales to what we saw last week with the Midnight Express, Magnum TA, and Mr. Wrestling 2. An angle that people still look back on to this day, and it remains an all-timer. Obviously, I'm referring to the tar and feather angle they shot the other week, where poor Magnum was left covered in syrup and feathers to be mocked and ridiculed. An angle so heinous and so devious, It even gave Bill Watts a newfound perspective on Jim Cornette's Midnight Express. And as such, he elaborated on this at the top of the program during this pre-taped interview with Jim Cornette. Staying right beside him, he explains that he's seen his handful of evil managers come through the Mid-South area. Skandar Akbar, Gary Hart, Rock Hunter. The list goes on. But at least Watts can claim those men were reasonably good athletes. I just realized how awesome all this is reading back in my notes, because I can hear Watts' voice as I'm talking about all of it. He goes, "You're the first athlete, or should I say non-athlete, who's also audacious, flamboyant, arrogant, rude, and a mama's boy. And if there's one thing we know about Bill Watts when it comes to his issues with Jim Cornette, out of those laundry list of insults, the worst of the bunch is the fact that Jim Cornette is a blatant mama's boy. I'm surprised he didn't call him a sissy here. That was the only thing missing from the equation. And as expected, his gripe is that Cornette's mommy buys all of his problems, which JC doesn't deny. In fact, he was pretty much like, well, why should I have to earn my money when I can just ask for it? I'm already born into wealth. What's the issue? Now, you know, he's not entirely wrong. So that was part one of the pre-tape. Just a reminder for the people watching at home that Bill Watts still thinks JC's a disreputable coward and deserves no respect. But then we phase into part two of the pre-tape. Actually, it was a pre-tape within a pre-tape. This is one that I think we missed the first week of January because Peacock didn't have the January 7th episode uploaded. It's a promo between Magnum TA and Wrestling 2, conducted by Bruiser Brody. And while they're talking about their big title win, beating Neidhart and Reed in the cage in New Orleans to capture the belts, in comes Cornette from off camera, and he begins reading the champs the riot act. The fact that they've been trying to get Magnum and 2's attention for weeks now. They want a title shot. Even though they were literally champions for all of like 7 days after this taping. And Corny's making it out like he's been trying for months to get these guys to defend their belts. I did like during this interview, as Cornette's running his mouth off and calling Magnum and Wrestling 2 a couple of frustrated chumps, you see Magnum start to ball up his fist a little bit. So Corny mid-sentence just goes, and I'm going to step back here a little bit as I continue my shit-talking rant. And of course, the entire time, I'm just watching Bruiser Brody's reactions. He's smiling his whole way through this interview, laughing at Cornette's banter. He's basically me, except I'm not the one on camera trying to be an unbiased interviewer. God. At least Lance Russell would have shaken his head or be like, come on, Jimmy. Call him out on his bullshit. Not Bruiser. No, Bruiser just laughs. Now, bear in mind, this was shot before the tar and feather angle, so when you see this for the first time, you're hearing him bring up chickens and roosters here. Babyfaces are making jokes about Cornette being better suited to be confined to a hen house warming the eggs. So you can kind of see what they were alluding to even before the actual angle last week with Magnum. And then from that point, here's where we got part 3 of the Midnight Express Wrestling 2 and Magnum timeline. The actual replay of the tar and feather angle. Also, I did want to point out, there was a noticeably big jump cut in the tape here where you could tell they edited a lot of material out from Cornette's follow-up promo. I have no idea what he said. And as far as the actual tar and feather deal, I mean, we covered the whole thing in depth last week, so if you want my bullet point by bullet point breakdown, just go check out last week's review. I did like the follow-up here, as Cornette's having a laugh at Magnum's expense. They're showing the afterbirth where Magnum's being helped up by Rick Rude, and direct quote from Cornette, "Limpin' Lanny Poffo." That got a pop out of me. And while poor Magnum is trying to get his bearings and leave the ring, you had the cleanup crew in the background sweeping up all the feathers and trying to clear out all the junk. I don't know why, but I also found that rather humorous. I was half expecting somebody in the crowd to go, "Clean up in aisle 4." And of course, we can't forget the grand finale, the part that still makes me laugh every time I go back and watch. The follow-up interview where Magnum and Wrestling 2 are at ringside with Watts. Magnum is obviously still covered in the feathers by this point. And it's supposed to be one of those really stern, somber moments where the babyfaces are being vulnerable and talking about how they're not going to stand for this kind of bull crap. They're going to hunt down the Midnight Express and get their revenge. And one of the more ironically funny moments in Magnum's career, he's standing there talking about how there are some people out there that might find something remotely humorous about this situation, but he considers it one of the most humiliating and degrading moments of his life. Still hilarious when I go back and listen to Magnum's delivery. I don't even know what it is about it, but it's one of the most unintentionally hysterical babyface deliveries I've ever heard. But the important part in all this, the Midnights are fully on the radar of Magnum TA and Mr. Wrestling 2. Anytime and any place they want to throw down, the champs will be ready, title or no title. And as far as the ramifications go for the Midnight Express's actions, Watts is here to deliver the news to Cornette that he's been fined $5,000 for his actions, which Cornette retorts by saying, "Well, Watts, you may have bankrupted a good portion of your roster with fines like that, but from where I stand, $5,000 is nothing more than a phone call home to mama." And then the single best moment of the show, another legendary moment here on Mid-South television, Watts goes, "That's the kind of man right there that just makes you want to ball up your fist and backhand him." Fucking awesome. Just keep planting the seeds, Bill. We all know where this is going. Quite literally, Jim Cornette is going to get it. God, what a great start to the show. And it's all recap footage. Everything in the opening 13 minutes was either previously taped content or follow-up interviews for the title feud. And it was the single best moment on the entire show. And if you all thought the Midnights had heat following the tar and feather angle, I'd have loved to have been a fly on the wall in the Irish McNeil Boys Club when they're listening to Jim Cornette's promo here with Watts. How many people were just begging for Watts to smack that motherfucker right across the back of the head. So great. Can't put it over enough. So we go back to the ring for action. We get Terry Taylor going up against Crusher Darso. Previously, he was scheduled to wrestle Nikolai Volkov, but Nikolai allegedly hurt his shoulder earlier in the day. A likely story. Sounds to me like he got cold feet after having been pinned last week by Taylor in that impromptu match. So immediately you're thinking, okay, clearly Volkov is going to run out at some point to interfere. And it didn't take long. Taylor and Darso wrestle for approximately 2 minutes. And then Volkov hits the ring for the immediate disqualification as he starts trying to go after Taylor with a hangman's rope. And at first, it looks like Taylor's going to find a way to break free from Volkov and avoid being choked out. But then Darsow runs in from behind so Volkov can wrap the noose around Taylor's neck, suspend him over the top rope. Obviously, this angle's been done 100,000 times in wrestling over the years. Granted, some executed better than others. But they at least did a good job making the hanging look convincing here. And eventually, Rick Rude and Brian Adias run out to send the Russians packing. I wrote here as a side note, funny seeing Brian Adias outside the clutches of Dallas here in 1984. I forgot that he worked occasional underneath matches for Midsouth. That was pretty much it for the segment. Simple little heat angle for the Russians. I mean, you can tell the plan is to have somebody eventually come in to team up with Taylor. At this point, it's probably a toss-up between either JYD or Duggan. I don't remember offhand which one, but those seem like the obvious two choices. And so we come back for more continuation in the Midnight Express Magnum and Wrestling 2 feud. Another absolutely phenomenal segment taking place here. And again, kind of like what I talked about a minute ago. You got Magnum TA and Mr. Wrestling 2 at the commentary booth with Boyd Pierce. And the idea here is that they've been scheduled to be guest commentators, which means they're not permitted to get physical during the match with the Midnight Express. And if they leave the booth here for whatever reason, they'll both be subjected to fines up to $2,500. So again, your immediate thought is, well, who's going to be first to flip the table over and make a beeline for the ring? Between the two of them, the fact that Mr. Wrestling 2 is dressed in a nice casual suit, all the while you got Biker Magnum sitting there with a leather jacket and gloves, looking like he's about 2 seconds away from blowing a gasket and beating some ass. So the match is Mike Jackson and Roger Bond versus Bobby Eaton and Dennis Condrey, with JC at a ringside taunting Magnum and 2 the whole way through the match. It should also be noted that JC's out there with a giant McDonald's paper bag. Gee, I wonder what he could be hiding in there. It ain't Chicken McNuggets. Tell you that for sure. I did kind of have a boomer moment watching this, though. Realizing, holy shit. The McDonald's logo, it is still not changed after all these years. That's insane. Some things really do never change. Food still sucks, and the classic logo is still around. So I talked about how amazing this was at the top. It's even better when you're watching it in real time, and you see the split screens where they show Magnum and Wrestling 2 watching from the commentary booth. Wrestling 2's got one hand on Magnum's shoulder. Magnum's sitting there like a caged animal, just ready to hit the ring at any moment. And it really is one of those brilliantly designed segments where it's a simple enhancement squash where the Midnights are just having fun and beating up on Jackson and Bond, getting some heat on themselves. Ian and Condrey are constantly looking over at the interview desk, making chicken noises and just being total douchebags. And you got Mr. Wrestling 2 serving as the rational-minded veteran, going, don't let him get inside your head, Magnum. Be strong. $2,500 is a lot of money. Stay calm and don't do anything stupid. So as you get to the finish where the Midnights go over with the Doomsday finish, Cornette hits the ring as Ian and Condrey have Bond pinned down. And as he goes to open the bag and pull out some more feathers, you see Wrestling 2 doing everything in his power to constrain and hold back this fucking loose pitbull Magnum TA. And it eventually gets to the point where you see Magnum just go, I can't take it anymore. And it's like straight out of a fucking cartoon animation. Magnum's off the headset. He's sprinting toward the ring as fast as he can. Wrestling 2's there yelling, "No! No!" And when Biker Magnum hits the ring and starts beating up on the Midnights, it's on, brother. And you know what? Wrestling 2 wasn't going to leave him hanging. If he's got to eat the bullet and take the $2,500 fine too, so be it. So they hit the ring and start beating up the Midnight Express as they go to commercial break. Absolute pandemonium in the venue. People are jumping up and down. Like, if anything, the segment is worth checking out simply for the Magnum TA spot where he finally has his Popeye moment. And Wrestling 2's in the background just screaming, "Damn it, no!" Poor Magnum. The young, dumb kid. He took the bait. Couldn't control himself. Wrestling 2 tried to warn him. He said, "Don't let him pull you in, Magnum. Watch their teamwork. Study their moves. But don't get involved." But Magnum was filled with so much rage and so much anger after everything that went down the other week. I think he had a little PTSD over the feathering spot here. Just another classic angle booked in the middle of this white-hot program. And then after cooler heads prevailed, and they managed to clear the ring of all the dead bodies, this is where we got the return of Nature Boy Buddy Landell to Midsouth. And he is now back sporting the full Nature Boy persona. He's no longer average Joe, generic brunette Buddy Landell. He's now going all in with the Ric Flair Buddy Rogers gimmick ripoff. The entrance robe was a strange choice, but God, that bleach blonde look. Now that's the classic Buddy Landell look that we've been waiting for. We saw it a little bit during the Crockett run in late '85. Actually, both times he was there for a cup of coffee. I almost forgot about him coming back in '86. I remember it didn't last all that long. So he wrestled Mike Starbuck here, complete with all the Flair-like mannerisms and movements. The only thing he didn't do was a classic Fargo strut. This was a good debut, though. Or re-debut. Definitely working as a full-fledged heel now. Wasn't a very long match. He ended up winning with a corkscrew elbow drop on Mike's chest. And as we'll see in the coming weeks, him and Butch Reed are going to get paired together for some really fun tag team action. You know, the story of Buddy Landell is always a sad one. I think most people at least have some foundational understanding of who he was, the places he worked over the years, the kind of talent he was. You know, the problems with Buddy always kind of stem from simple things like lack of motivation or drug use. Especially in the latter stages of his career where you could tell he just clearly stopped caring. I mean, we just saw him work a couple matches for the WWF in late '95. That Buddy Landell was a far cry from the work he was doing here in '84. At least he looked like he wanted to be here. Those couple of matches he worked for Vince at the tail end of '95, he looked like he'd have rather been picking crud out from underneath his toenails. You know, it's really hard to pinpoint what the driving force was for his downhill fall. What exactly led to the lack of motivation? I think a lot of it had to do with the drugs. But then again, you've heard the stories over the years, even from Buddy's own mouth, how he thought he should have been used and treated more as a top guy. You remember, one of the big decisions to him leaving Crockett again in '86 was when he caught wind that he was going to be used as a top guy there. He wanted to work a program with Flair for the world title, and Flair didn't want to do it. Especially after all that shit that went down in 85 when they were actually going to pull the trigger on a Flair Landell title program. And I think Landell was supposed to win the belt. But then shit happened. And I don't think Crockett really wanted to push him in 86 anyway. You know, they were right in the middle of grooming Magnum TA for Starrcade, which, well, we remember how that all ended. I always liked Buddy. I didn't see as much of his Memphis work over the years. I always thought this version of Buddy Landell was always the strongest version of him. It's probably good he had somebody like Bill Watts as a boss, because at least he was capable of keeping Buddy in check. And he lasts a good while here in Mid-South. I think he's here through the entirety of 84, right before he leaves for Mid-Atlantic sometime in 85. It's kind of shocking to see Buddy Landell working for a company for a 6-month window. Everything we've seen from him in our reviews have been very short stints. So, what do we have next? Well, we had Brian Diaz versus Mickey Henry. And it sure was Brian Diaz versus Mickey Henry. It was during this match where Watson mentioned the Rock and Roll Express for the first time. So they had a special video package that'll put a smile on all the ladies' faces. And it turns out it was the video that I was thinking of when Watts mentioned it. And it even put a smile on my face when I went back and saw it again. He also touched on the TV title tournament that they're about to start in the coming weeks. Didn't Watts say something about that like a month ago? God, they are really milking this TV title tournament, aren't they? It's becoming the new Glacier debut saga. Keep teasing it for months and never actually deliver on it. Anyway, this match kind of sucked. I don't even know what the hell happened at the finish here, but Diaz went for some kind of O'Connor roll on Henry, which got completely fucked up. And, then he just improvised briefly and somehow stacked up Henry and pinned him a few seconds later. I guess it kind of exemplifies the state of world-class championship wrestling now, doesn't it? In Mid-South, Brian Diaz was the weakest guy on the roster, bar none. Meanwhile, in world-class, he was considered one of the better workers. Competition wasn't all that tough, for being honest. Then we had Rick Rude taking on Masayo Ito, or as Boyd pronounced it, Musio. Well, he gave it a college try. It was better than Bill Watts bumbling over himself for 5 minutes trying to figure out what Asiatic culture Masayo was a part of. At least he figured out he was Japanese. So, well, I'll give him this. Ito was a much better choice for a Japanese heel than the Black Ninja. It's always tricky when you have a wrestling company trying to get over a new Oriental talent. Most of the time, you never know how the fans are going to react to it. Sometimes you get those diamonds in the rough, like Muta or Jushin Liger. Guys that translate well to the American market. And then other times you get Hakushi or any of the modern Japanese guys at companies like AEW try to force down everybody's throat. And nobody outside the niche audience gives a fuck about them. Okada, Tanahashi, Ibushi. Most of their work looks like garbage anyway, because none of it translates to the American style. Sorry if that pisses anybody off, but you know it's true. You find me one fucking Okada segment in AEW that has not actively driven away viewers, I will send you a check for $100. Anyway, I like what they did here with Masayo. He ended up getting Rude in the illegal chokehold, which forced the ref to disqualify him. But they did the fake blood gimmick where Rude had a thing in his mouth, so he started coughing up blood as Ito kept keeping the hold applied. And obviously that's a good way to get some heat on him and establish that he's got a dangerous move in his arsenal. I don't really remember much about Masayo Ito's run in Mid-South, unfortunately. I'm trying to remember if they eventually give him a manager. Because when I look at him on his own, I don't know. Something about that looks incomplete. You know, Akbar at least managed the Black Ninja for a temporary period, even though it never really went anywhere. But because of the fact that Ito doesn't speak English or can't really do any promos, I mean, he's going to need a heater, somebody to talk about him to get over his persona. I just can't remember if that ever happens. But, to close it out, a fun way to end the program. The Rock and Roll Express video package. And before I actually dive into the specifics here, this particular R&R video, this promo package, get ready to see this fucking video package a lot. Because you're about to see this thing a lot. This is going to slowly become the new Kamala hype package. Remember when we saw the same exact Kamala video in several different territories, at least 50-something times between 1982 and 1983? I should also point out, if you're watching this on Peacock, you're not going to get to hear the original Joan Jett and the Blackhearts cover of I Love Rock and Roll. It's the same generic canned music we've heard them play over the rock and roll matches for Crockett. I highly recommend you try to go find the unedited version, because it definitely fits the video a lot better. God, this video is still amazing all these years later. I mean, when you think about the fact that Ricky Morton and Robert Gibson were literally a team for, what, a year? I mean, even by this point, they only had a handful of Memphis clips to show for the highlight reel. So, of course, the actual video itself was mainly Ricky and Robert hanging out in front of a jukebox, bopping their head to music, hanging out in their Corvette, wearing what I can merely best describe as prototypical hippy-dippy late 70s, early 80s skin-tight t-shirts. Shirts that I'm pretty sure would be illegal to sell these days. They were so goddamn hideous. But what are you going to say? It's the Rock and Roll Express. They were over like gods. Even only after having been in Memphis for a little over a year as a tag team. And this whole thing is literally a 2-minute clip of Ricky and Robert winking at the camera, staring a hole through our souls, you know, shaking their heads and smiling every so often, sitting in their Corvette being all cool, driving approximately 3 hours through a gated driveway. It was 80s. It was very much an 80s hype promo. A WWF cinematic masterpiece this was not. It was better. It was just Ricky Morton and Robert Gibson being cold dudes with smooth moves. And as we'll see, they're about to become one of the hottest draws in Mid-South over the next year. You just add them to the list of great talent influx that we were getting around this time. I mean, they already scored big getting the Midnight Express. Now you throw the Rock and Roll in there? Talk about the jackpot. But I can't do this video justice. It's on YouTube. Go search for it and watch it. It's the greatest hype package of all time. Man, we're just chugging right along here in this epic 1984 timeline, aren't we? Another stellar edition of Mid-South Wrestling this week. And we're only in week 3. God, this is epic stuff we're witnessing, dude. Hot programs, great talent pool, fan interest is finally back in full swing. I mean, when you talk about the kind of booming success that wrestling companies should strive for, this is the kind of stuff they should be paying attention to. AEW had this kind of momentum for maybe 6 months. When you think back to that late 2021, early 2022 timeframe. But for me, after the Punk MJF stuff, that shit quickly fell off the map. Big time. And you know, as hot as WWE is right now from a record business standpoint, even the booking now is nowhere close to what Midsouth was doing. Even within the first few weeks of 1984. I mean, yeah, WWE's got big names and big stars. But I would still give Mid-South the edge in terms of the overall package. They just didn't have the same audience capacity as WWE did. I know we're kind of comparing apples and oranges. Seriously, though, I'm saying this now. While you still have the ability, don't regret it. Go find a way to watch the Mid-South tape library. Who knows how long this content will even be available? I mean, by whatever it is, February or March of next year, highly doubt this stuff is going to be on Peacock. Once WWE's deal expires with them, that's pretty much it. And if you manage to find any of this stuff on YouTube, you're all subjected to copyright issues. So it might not be there forever. Try to seek out this stuff while you can, man. It's the kind of classic pro wrestling that I still believe holds up today, and you could probably do most, if not all of these angles and matches in a modern context. I think they would still get over. Which really goes to show how timeless all this old footage is. And speaking of timeless classic footage, boy, I wish I could say the same about World Class in 1986. But I think I'd be lying if I said a lot of this later World Class footage is timeless. I mean, occasionally there's good stuff that holds up, but a lot of it is few and far between. Even though last week was a considerably good episode, and much of the good stuff was related to pre-tape material they had already shot with the fabulous Freebirds. When you look at the show as a whole, the stuff they taped at the Sportatorium, it was kind of a show. Very bland. We did at least get a pretty fun main event this week. A main event that Bill Mercer claimed it may not be well contained inside the Sportatorium. It might legitimately blow the roof off the joint. Well, I wouldn't go that far. Although anytime Bruiser Brody makes an appearance, you never know what to expect from him. So we open this week with Jack Victory versus Tommy Montana. And this was actually perfect, because it was a good opportunity for me to test a theory, having seen my handful of Jack Victory matches over the last year. Perhaps this is TMI, but I really had to take a shit right before they rang the bell to start this match. So, rather than me pause the show, I was like, you know what, let me try something here. I'm going to see if I can watch this entire match while sitting on the toilet, not take any notes, by the time I finish and get back to my computer, I guarantee nothing noteworthy will have taken place in this match. Sure as shit. Literally speaking, this was everything that happened during this 10-minute match. Well, I'm just cooking on the Jonathan. Lots of stalling and crowd working by Victory. They would do a lockup spot, and then Victory would bail to the floor and stall. Then they would come back and do another spot. Then Victory would bail out to the floor and stall again. And it was like almost literally 5 straight minutes of nothing but that. They did fuck all of nothing in this match. The most boring televised match in wrestling history. Finally, they do a little bit of stuff at the end to work the crowd up a little bit. And by that, I mean simple shoot-off spots and takedowns. Then finally, Victory won with a running lariat off the ropes after Montana had kicked out at 3.1. That's it. That's the whole match. The only good to come out of it was Bill Mercer mentioning who all the regional champions were, which is good. I mean, how many times have I come on here and complained that belts randomly switch hands and there's never an explanation for how it happens? At least Mercer was like, hey, just in case you forgot who all the champions were, here's your bi-monthly reminder. So yeah, that was the first 12 minutes. I'm slowly growing to detest anytime Jack Victory gets booked to wrestle. Like, there's working smart, not doing absolutely more than necessary to get a match over. And then there's intentionally doing so little that it just lulls people into a coma. That is exactly what Jack Victory is doing. So when we come back, this is where they showed the film of the dynamic duo breakup from Christmas Star Wars. It was during a tag match with Kevin and Kerry Von Erich going up against Gino Hernandez and Chris Adams. And Gino refused to tag in Chris when Chris was desperate for the save. So, of course, after the DQ finish where Chris and Gino lost, but still reclaimed the belts, that's where we saw Chris slap Gino across the face and tear him a new one for not taking the tag. And on top of that, we also get this great interview that Gino conducted with Mark Lawrence at Fort Worth. This actually may have been the best part of the show looking back. Gino's talking about all the rumors of the dynamic duo being finished. Here's the real scoop. According to Gino, yeah, Chris got hot at Gino, but Gino had a valid excuse. He hurt his knee in that match, which some people may have not realized. So when they got back to the locker room, Chris was back there making a scene and throwing shit around. Gino had to punch him out to send a message, to which, best part of the segment, the aghast Mark Lorenz responds, "You knocked him out?" Just could not believe Gino would succumb to such a heinous thing. So this is just great heel shit. Gino's so full of crap and everybody knows it. Totally throwing Chris under the bus here, despite him claiming that the dynamic duo are still on good terms. And so finally out comes Chris. And, well, he's a little agitated, as one might expect. I have to assume a lot of this was taped before last week when Chris showed up to sucker punch Gino after a squash match. Because even by this point, Chris had not totally blown a gasket with Gino yet. But this part's awesome. Chris is like, "Gino, what's going on? You were supposed to pick me up before we got to the building today. You didn't show up." So Gino goes, "No, I said I would meet you here in Fort Worth. I did not say I would pick you up. So Chris goes, well, what's going on? I missed what you guys were talking about here. And so fucking Mark Lorenz, the tattletale of the decade, he goes, well, Gino was here just telling me that he had to knock you out at Christmas Star Wars to get you to calm down after you were seen going off on him. And immediately, the moment Mark sells Gino out, you see Gino smack him on the shoulder and be like, dude, what the fuck? So, yeah, you can pretty much see what this is all leading to. Gino tries to save face, but Chris basically tells him, yeah, that's right. I slapped you on Christmas night in front of millions of people. But what would you say if I slapped you in front of millions of people right now? So he delivers another strike across Gino's face. And then when Chris turns to leave, Gino jumps him from behind and runs him into the ring post on the floor. And if there was ever any doubt over the breakup of the dynamic duo before, well, they put those doubts to bed here. Because then we had two pre-tape promos from both Gino and Chris, vowing they would tear each other apart and stop at nothing to prove who the better man truly is. Gino tells Chris that he taught him everything he knows. He took him from Gary Hart's stable and made him into a somebody. And this is the BS respect he gets in response. Meanwhile, Chris tells Gino that he didn't teach him shit. In fact, Chris has known from the very beginning that Gino is nothing but low-life scum. And he's going to prove that to the world when he gets his hands on him. That's a detail I actually forgot about. God, remember when Chris was aligned with Gary Hart? A lot of good that did. I completely forgot about that alliance. How long did that last? Less than 3 months? Then they just unceremoniously drop it. But, hey, credit to them. I know this feud probably didn't pan out the way they wanted it to because of what happens to Gino pretty soon. But they went out of their way to hype this up like a huge deal. And there are still some unanswered questions. Technically, they are still co-owners of the tag team titles. So what happens there? Do they just vacate them? Or do they actually try to play that up as a story and force them to team up together even though they want to tear each other's heads off? Guess we'll find out. But this is a thumbs up part to the program. Really great execution for everything. God, what a fucking promo Gino was, man. And not to undermine Chris here, because he was good too. But Gino just had that special something, man. I mean, you listen to him talk here and you're like, had he not died so young, he could have been a huge star if he'd have gotten a chance to work for Crockett at some point. I don't know how far he'd have ever gone working for Vince, but hey, it makes you wonder. He'd have panned out better than Lance Von Erich ever did. Tell you that for sure. So I have a question. Last time we saw Missy Hyatt and John Tatum together, didn't Missy throw a tantrum and basically leave Tatum high and dry after they lost the mixed tag? Now they're back here. Perfectly okay. Of course, it wound up being a totally different story by the end of the segment. I think we also mentioned the other week, apparently the Sunshine Missy feud is still ongoing. The mixed tag at Christmas night was not, in fact, the very end. They're still trying to pry out each other's eyeballs. Not entirely sure when Sunshine became Lance's temporary valet here, but I mean, I guess it made sense, given he was wrestling Tatum. Got to keep the tension going with the girls somehow. Now, of course, that also meant we had to watch John Tatum and Lance Von Erich wrestle. And once David Manning kicked Sunshine and Missy away from ringside, I was like, well, now it's about to become significantly less interesting. So the match, for all intents and purposes, is just there. Can't even really call it a bad match. Just nothing of note happens. It was very much like the opener with Victory in Montana, except Tatum and Lance actually did a couple wrestling spots. They just didn't look particularly good because, well, Lance wasn't very good. But we get to the end where Lance tries to give Tatum a crossbody dive off the middle rope, but Missy finds a way to make it back to ringside to trip up Lance. Somehow David Manning did not see the blatant interference, even though it happened directly in front of his fucking face. And it turns out the interference spot was utterly pointless, because then Tatum went up and missed a diving elbow drop and got pinned anyway. So they managed to make Tatum look both weak and like a complete and total buffoon. And since the story apparently is that Missy Hyatt is carrying John Tatum's scrotum in her purse, after Tatum loses, Missy goes back to bitch at him. And when she goes to smack Lance in the face, she gets picked up and bent over his knee for a good old-fashioned spanking. Naturally, Missy is embarrassed by this. So she takes it out on Tatum by slapping him multiple times across the face, to the point where you actually just wonder, why doesn't Tatum just stand up and punch his broad as hard as humanly possible? It's a valid question. But I guess I would be taking the class out of world-class championship wrestling. Can't get that extreme. And so Missy leaves, and presumably this is like the fourth breakup with Tatum and Missy in the last month. It's like a bad high school relationship gone wrong. How many times can they possibly break up and get back together before you're like, you know, I don't think these two are really meant for each other. I mean, Mercer seemed to think like they were finished. But, guess we'll have to wait until we see Tatum next time on television. If he shows back up and they're a happy couple again, I'm calling bullshit. Breaking up and getting back together 4 times is one thing. But my God, man. 5 times? Have some standards, bro. She ain't that hot. So that brings us to the main event. And I mentioned Bruiser Brody earlier, so I kind of let the cat out of the bag. But this was an interesting one they booked. Talk about a unique cast of personalities. The match is Bruiser Brody and the Missing Link going up against Rick Rude and the One Man Gang. A match that would have made Bill Watts mark out for in 1982. You know, it's still funny how Rude was clearly the smallest guy of everybody involved, yet he was still in the best ring shape. And you know, it was a surprisingly good match, considering the parties involved here. I remember they had started something with Brody and gang at one point earlier this year. Actually, it was late last year. I don't know if they ever resolved it, though, because Brody just kind of vanished off of television. Like, he was prone to do a lot during this time. But they had a fun little exchange here at one point. Meanwhile, you had Link and Rude going at it, and still working the story of Link's face turn and the split from the Pringle Dynasty. You had Sunshine out there at ringside in the corner for the Missing Link. And it breaks down into a 4-way with everybody at the end. At one point, Link tried to go up and give Rude a diving headbutt, but Percy hit him from behind with his cane. So as Link is chasing Percy around ringside, You see Percy waddling around and trying to evade him. And I do mean waddling. To say Percy was running here, that would be giving him too much credit. But, well, then Rude just tossed Link over the top rope for the automatic DQ. And there was a bit of confusion over who the legal guy was at the end. But once the bell rang, it was pretty obvious that the heels were getting disqualified. We also had a great spot where Sunshine's trying to pull Percy out to the floor. Poor Percy's fat ass is getting tangled up in the ring ropes. Looked like a giant penguin trying to flap his feet in the air. I was actually worried for a sec that he was going to fall on top of Sunshine. That would have been the end of her. But you get the closing minute where Brody's swinging the giant chain around. Link's in there doing whatever the fuck the missing Link typically does. I still don't entirely know. But it kind of had that old school, traditional, world-class, chaotic vibe. I appreciate that they're at least trying new stuff with the newer talents, not directly related to Kevin or Kerry. And you know, that really was the main takeaway from the whole show. Outside that minute-long clip where they showed the Christmas Star Wars breakup with the dynamic duo, Kevin and Kerry didn't make a single appearance on this show. That kind of got me remembering another big event that's about to happen sometime in 1986. The motorcycle accident with Kerry. He's about to be off television for a significant part of this year. God, when you pile that on top of Mike still being off television. I mean, we're about to enter a period later this year where Kevin Von Erich is going to be the only featured Von Erich on the show. And subsequently, that's where fan interest starts to die off a little bit. It's almost weird not seeing the Von Erichs in a featured match this week. I mean, yeah, Lance wrestled, but I'm talking about the real Von Erichs, not the fake relative. God, dude, just thinking about all the horrible shit that's about to go down over the next 12 months. I mean, they're already going through the brand change. We're only a few weeks away from Gino's death. Later on this year, you got Kerry in the motor accident that puts him on the shelf. You know, Mike's still not fully recovered from his health crisis last year. And you know, he's only got another year left too before he's dead. I forgot about that. It's just, I mean, we are witnessing the real beginning of the end. The downhill fall of world class. It's happening right in front of our eyes, man. Attendance figures are rapidly dropping. Company morale is going down the tubes. And even though they got stories going on, how much of it is really selling tickets? Well, we'll see in due time. Especially when we get to the Texas Stadium shows. But that is going to round out this one. I'm still very stuffy and not fully recovered from last week's tribulations. But you know what? I'm still breathing. Somehow. I don't know how. I've had a lot of trouble sleeping. I'm just so clogged up. Just can't breathe through my nose properly. Hopefully it sorts itself out in another week. If not, I might need to go see somebody. But for this Monday, we have 2 shows we're going to review. Classic shows. The 1996 Royal Rumble and the follow-up edition to Retro Raw. So make sure you stay posted for that one. And I believe it's the following week. Yeah, it would have to be the following week. That'll be the 2025 Royal Rumble. So we'll see how that goes. A couple big shows coming up, though. So make sure you stay posted for the channel coming forward, and I'll catch you all soon. Take care. Peace out.